just looked at a while loop in the previous video, and that's something that has an external condition that needs to be met. But a lot of times you don't necessarily need to. You don't want to have a variable outside of your code or your immediate code that you're checking, and so that's where these things called for loops come into play. And I find myself using for loops way more often than I do while loops. In fact, I very rarely use while loops just because I don't trust myself to remember to have that external check. And I wind up invariably causing some sort of problem in my code where it never actually executes. So a for loop has a little bit more code, but you're way less likely to accidentally tie up your program with it. I'm going to make a basic for loop that is going to draw some lines across the screen, that increase in length and get a little bit brighter as they move across on the x-axis. So the way that a for loop is constructed is you say for, and then there's again parentheses, or parens where you're gonna encapsulate the thing that you're checking, much like a while loop, and then there's some curly braces to actually the code that you're going to execute, right? And so inside of this for loop up here, this is where you're going to declare everything, right? Now, I'll show you exactly how you do this, right? And so, we create a variable inside of here, right? And on a technical note, this is called the index, right? You don't have to use I. You can name this variable whatever you like, right? As long as you aren't interfering with something else in your code. So let I equal 0. And then what you do, and then a semicolon, and I could equal anything, right? I'm just setting it 0 because I want this to start drawing on the left-hand side of my screen. And then you write in what you're going to check against, right? So for me, my condition is I is less than window width, or just width, I'm sorry. And then after that, this is where you say what it's going to do, how you're going to treat this variable, or what you're going to how you're going to sort of increment it or decrement it, or what you're going to do, what operation you're going to apply to it afterwards. So here I'm going to say x plus equals 20. So this means that after, so what this means is that after every time I go through this chunk of code that I'm going to write in here, the for loop says, okay, is I, as long as I is less than the width, then I'll just keep on executing this stuff. And after I execute this stuff, each time I'm going to add 20 to I. So first time through it's 0, second time through it's 20, 40, 60, 80, etc. And each time, as long as I is less than the width, it'll continue to execute it. As soon as this is not true, as soon as I is greater than the width, then it breaks out and it stops executing this and goes on to the rest of your program. So the thing that's checking in a while loop, you need to have it's checking something external. Here it's checking something that's kind of internal to itself, right? So so inside of here, I'm going to make a line, right? And we'll have it, I will be the x-axis. In fact, let me just clean this up a little bit. I'm just going to call this x. Right, so it's a little bit more intelligible, right? And then we'll say we want this to draw in the center, but we want it to kind of grow as it goes over time. So we'll say height divided by 2, and then we'll say plus x divided by 10. And so what that'll do is that'll start out really small, and then over time it'll get to be bigger, right? So then we can say, so then the end point of our line is going to be x, and then height divided by 2 minus x 10, right? So let me change the stroke color so we can see this, right? Make the stroke 255. Save it, and then run this little widget, and ooh, look at that. That looks kind of lovely, right? I've got, so we can see every time we move along here, along the, we've got these spaced 20 pixels apart. I'm guessing. It says 20. I'm taking it on faith that it actually is. And then we can see it starts to grow over time as well, right? We can, we can change the stroke in a couple different ways, right? We can move this inside of here, and instead of just having it stay a constant color, we can have it sort of like darker at the outset and brighter at the end, right? So we know that there's a ratio between x and the width. So we can say x divided by width is going to give us a fraction, right? Somewhere between 0 and 1. And if we multiply that by 255, what it'll do is it'll give us a value that's going to go from black up to white as we move across, right? And so now we've got this really nice sort of like gradient starting out down here and moving on up. And, even if we wanted to like, you could play around with that. You could do something like, if you wanted it to go the opposite way, where it faded off into the distance, you could say the absolute value of 1.0 minus that, right? And then we'd get the opposite effect, where it's really bright here, and then it just fades off into nothingness. So this is how a for loop works. It's the syntax is a little bit funky at first, but you'll get accustomed to it the more you use it, and they're really powerful and really useful. In the next video, I'm going to show you nesting for loops inside of one another, which becomes really helpful for you later on when you're dealing with images, video, etc. And it also helps create some like pretty funky, some pretty funky images.